A or B?
If something's easier to process in the mind, people tend to think it's true.
Left or right?
If you don't make any decision, things will turn out all right for you.
Yes or no?
Companies or governments can use nudges for ill.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Deciding, the podcast where we unravel the process of decision-making and how to do it as effectively as possible. And the decision made by millions of Americans in November last year led to this.
They voted for us in record numbers. Every single day, we're now putting America first and fighting to get the most out of every single tax dollar.
I don't know when you're listening, but this episode goes live exactly 2 months to the day since President Donald Trump was sworn in for his second term. Since then, he's embarked on a series of decisions that have horrified lots of people everywhere.
There was a short-term pause or funding freeze on certain discretionary spending payments, such as government grants, only for us to quickly look at the scams, dishonesty, waste, and abuse that's taken place in our government for too long.
This included a funding freeze, stopping trillions of dollars of financial support across the whole of America. The courts ordered the government to reverse the decision, and the order was ignored. This is something that people in the know are worried about. That includes Harvard law professor Cass Sunstein. In his most recent New York Times article headlined, "This theory is behind Trump's power grab," he says that the president's decision to ignore things like court orders is not a good thing, and says it's possible that the country will see a significant shift in power from independent agencies to the White House. For better or for worse, he says, that shift could be profoundly unsettling, and in some respects, it could be dangerous. As a law professor, Cass Sunstein specializes in constitutional law, administrative law, and behavioral economics. And this isn't the first time he's been involved at the very top of US politics. In 2009, he worked for Barack Obama as administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. He was employed to use his insight into the way people behave to improve government regulations. And a lot of that insight was set out in Nudge, the global bestseller he wrote with Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler. It introduced the concept of nudging, a strategy for improving decision-making by subtly guiding people's choices while preserving individual freedom, an idea that has influenced policymakers all over the world. Not long ago, but before Trump returned to the White House, I was at a conference in London. It featured speakers talking about everything from wellness to data mining. And Cass Sunstein was talking about decision-making. So my decision was clear. I did what any self-respecting podcaster would do when presented with a rare one-on-one opportunity with a global thought leader. I pitched for a spontaneous discussion on the power of nudges and driving decisions. He agreed. And here's the result, starting with a little bit of fanboying. What's it like being part of a global movement that has fundamentally shifted the way people think?
Well, it's an honor, and I think the reason is that people were eager for something that would help identify strategies that would make lives better while maintaining freedom of choice. So the idea that there could be a framework that people could use in immensely creative ways of their own with innovations that Thaler and I certainly didn't anticipate. I think that's taken off with astonishing speed and energy, and it's a little surreal to see it.
Talk to me about the concept of nudge and how you emerged with this idea that you can, using freedom of choice, so not forcing, not pushing, not cajoling, not incentivizing, not bullying, not mandating, but getting people to make choices on their own, subconsciously, to do better things.
Well, I have a friendly amendment, not subconsciously. So think of a GPS device where you're trying to get, let's say, to London from maybe Heathrow, and you don't know how to do that. And the GPS device nudges you. It shows you that if that's the direction you want, here's how you get there. And a GPS device is a canonical nudge. It's something that maintains freedom of choice in two different ways. First, if you think, I don't want to go to London, I want to go to Oxford, you can say that. And second, if the GPS tells you this is the way to get to London or Oxford, you can say, well, I see that, but I have my own preferred route, which is a little maybe more romantic or a little more adventurous, and I don't like the GPS's nudge. You can say, I reject it. So think, for example, of going to a grocery store and there's something that tells you about the nutritional content of food, where there's something that says this has shrimp or this has peanuts for people who are allergic to those things, or there's something maybe in some places that will tell you about the caloric content. All of these things are nudges. They're like GPS devices. They steer you in a certain direction, or they make it easier for you to get where you want to go. But if you want to reject the nudge, you're completely allowed to do that.
What is it in our brains that makes us more susceptible to accepting that sort of direction?
There are two different kinds of nudges, and it's very important to distinguish them. Some of them are educative. So if you are going to a bank and trying to have some transactions with the bank, and there's some information that if you do this, you're going to be out a lot of money in the short term, and if you do that, it's not going to cost you much, but maybe you're not going to get as much benefit. That is just helping you know something you didn't know before, and it happens very quickly like a GPS device. It's very simple and easy. And our brain, the prefrontal cortex, you're not talking to a neuroscientist, but I think that's what it is. The prefrontal cortex kind of gets that, and we can process that information. And the nudge helps us figure out what's the right approach to take. There are other nudges that are architectural, so that if you're automatically enrolled, let's say, in double-sided printing on your laptop, that's how it's set up. You can shift it to single-sided printing if you want. The easy thing to do is often the thing that people will do because we're busy. And if you are automatically enrolled in pension plan or automatically enrolled in green energy, I wouldn't want to identify a particular brain region for this. That would be a little hazardous. But it is the case that if something is giving simplicity the benefit of the doubt, if there's an alliance between the simple way to go and the way to go that's in your interest, probably you'll do it, not only because it's in your interest, but because the human mind likes simplicity.
Are we busy or are we lazy?
When a nudge works, it might be because people are neither busy nor lazy. They just want to know, let's say, how to get healthier, and a nudge will make it very straightforward for them to figure that out. Sometimes people are busy and they won't attend to something. So if they're automatically enrolled, say, in green energy, as is happening in Germany and Switzerland and California, 3 places that are using automatic enrollment in green energy, people are really busy, they won't bother to change unless it's clear to them that green energy is, let's say, unreliable energy or expensive energy. And if people are lazy, as some people are some of the time, that will mean that, let's say, an architectural nudge will be very powerful, where people, let's say, it's really easy to take up some benefit program. All you have to do is a click, and then lazy people will do the click. But if they had to fill out a 17-page form, maybe they would have not benefited from the program.
These are programs, however, where choices are made on your behalf. When it comes to us making our own choices and making our own decisions, we can be encouraged to do those choices. And those are subtle things. On the menu, you could have the Caesar salad, you could have the Greek salad, or you can have the steak with fries and onion rings. There is a consequence to each one of those. There's a cost to each one of those. If you put the calorific contents next to each one of those, is that the nudge?
Yes, I'd back up a little bit and say it's not quite right to say that nudges are decisions made on your behalf. So a GPS device doesn't really do that, or that's under descriptive. A GPS device allows you to say, this is where I want to go, how do I get there? And if there's something, let's say, at a grocery store that tells you, something about this is the healthy section, then it doesn't make a decision on your behalf. You have to decide whether to choose the healthy section or choose, let's say, the high calorie, potentially more delicious section. So it's for you. Now, you're quite right that there are cases where if you don't make any decision, things will turn out all right for you. That's a kind of nudge. So if you go to a workforce, let's say, and they say, here's your healthcare plan, here's your savings plan, here's 7 other plans for you. If you don't want any of them, you can opt out, but these are what you're going to have by default. That's all making a decision in a sense for you, but it's up to you to decide whether to stick with it or switch. There's a lot of interest all over the world in something called secure by default, where technologies have cybersecurity built into them. And rather than putting a lot of pressure on individuals to figure out what are the things I'm supposed to do to be cyber secure, that idea of secure by default is a way of making the cyber secure outcome easy for you. And in a sense, that does make the decision for you.
You said earlier that you've been astounded by the revolution that has happened as a result of the principle of nudging. For example, there are apps in the United States which you can join the Nudge app and you can pick your city, Chicago or New York or Washington, D.C. You can pick London if you get the UK version, and it will nudge you towards the best restaurants. It will nudge you to the best shows. You've created a revolution in thinking about the way in which people make decisions.
Well, I'd say that it's the best thing you can hope for if an idea helps catalyze other people's creativity so that something goes well. I worked for 4 years in the Obama administration, and there was, and there's continued to be since the Obama administration, keen U.S. government interest in nudging. And I'll just give you one program that I have a hard time discussing without starting to cry, which is a program where the response was to a situation where poor children who are eligible for free school lunches and breakfasts aren't signing up. And what do you do with that? These are little kids who are poor, who have a right to nutritious meals, and the parents don't sign up, not clear why. It might be that they're scared. They see some form from the government. It might be, as you say, they're really busy. They're trying to handle a tough economic situation, and then they get some letter from the government, and they think, I got a lot of things to do. I don't want to deal with this. Or it might be it's just very confusing to figure out what this program is and whether it's a good idea to sign up for it. So what we did was to have something called direct certification, where the kids are automatically enrolled. And at a recent count, 15 million children were benefiting from nutritious free school meals. That's a life changer for those kids. And to see that in play from the U.S. Department of Agriculture had the lead, including homeless kids and migrant kids. That's something that you feel honored to play some role in.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you might also enjoy The We Society. From education to the economy, the grand challenges facing our society remain as pressing as ever. Should we switch to a 4-day working week? Is education the key to social mobility? How can we unlock the productivity problem? That's why I'm recommending you give The We Society a listen. It's hosted by journalist and author Will Hutton, and each episode features expert guests sharing their big ideas for changing the way we live. Why not make The We Society your next listen? After this one, of course. Available now on Spotify, Apple, and all good podcast platforms. Is there any concern in you that this same way of thinking can be used negatively in terms of voting decisions, in terms of the choices we make, whether you're getting a Facebook ad pushed at you or you're getting certain messaging at you, particularly in a very confusing, cluttered and misinformed world?
Completely. So Thaler and I often sign copies of Nudge saying nudge for good. Those are the 3 words we use. And you're completely right that creative, let's say malevolent people who are trying to exploit what we call behavioral biases, meaning people are prone often to inertia. They are often unrealistically optimistic. This is our species. Welcome to us. We are often present bias. The short term really matters. The long term is a foreign country, later land we're not sure we're ever going to visit. And if people are prone to inertia, if they're unrealistically optimistic, and if they show present bias, then companies or governments can use nudges for ill. And we've seen in the last years, particularly, a focus on something called dark patterns, which often involve the use of behavioral economics and nudging to make situations not so good for people, as when people find it very easy to sign up for, let's say, a subscription to a magazine, call it Magazine of Boredom and Horror, and you get 3 free months, Magazine of Boredom and Horror. But to cancel your subscription to this magazine, which people aren't likely to like very much, I just made up the title, by the way. If it's hard to unsubscribe, then people won't unsubscribe. And the idea, it's sometimes called Roach Motel, of easy sign up and difficult unsubscribe, that's a real problem. And it often hits people who don't have a lot of money particularly hard, both because losing money if you don't have much is worse than if you have a lot, and because people who are poor often they're dealing with 1,001 things, and to take the trouble to unsubscribe to this dumb magazine, that's not the most fun way to spend a day.
And that's a commercial proposition. That is the way to hook subscribers into a publication, and it's dishonorable and it's devious. But at the same time, the content in that magazine could very well be nudging in its own sort of way. So you could have political parties, you could have entire countries, for example, the bot farms of the world, for example, not necessarily nudging, but pushing in a series of rapid nudges, people to vote in a certain way, so behave in a certain way, or not to vote, for example.
Completely. So we see nudging, there's a lot of data on this, in the form of hidden terms for campaign contributions, where you agree to give some money to a candidate, and there's a hidden term that says, with this agreement, you agree to give weekly or monthly donations. So you thought you were giving money just this week, and that was your contribution, but you're giving it for lots of weeks and lots of months, and you didn't quite know that because it was small print. And some campaigns are using that in a way that's, I think dishonest is a fair word. It's a little more like manipulation than deception. Of course, you're right that if you want to discourage people from voting, there are lies you can say, or there are things you can say that are designed to distract and divert, that can discourage voting, or that can nudge people to make certain votes that are in the interest of the nudger and not necessarily the nudgee. So think for a moment of the things that tend to work for nudges. If something is easy, people are more likely to do it. If there's a social norm supporting certain choices, then people are more likely to support those choices. If something is timely, meaning people are given the nudge at exactly the time when it's likely to be most impactful, people are more likely to do it. And if something's attractive, it's likely to have more of an impact. And we have dozens, in some cases hundreds, of empirical studies on each of those concepts. And certainly you can use them for, let's say, self-interested political nudging.
And people, I mean, it was Hans Rosling in his fantastic book Factfulness said, you can't make decisions when your mind is overwhelmed by fear or governed by fear. It was better phraseology than that. But we're so overwhelmed by information. How do we process more effectively between fact, fiction, and deception in a really tightly contested world?
It's a problem, and something I've been focused on a lot in the last year. Here's an example of why nudging with respect to falsehood can be very powerful. If something is repeated, if it's said twice, people are more likely to believe it's true. It's called the illusory truth effect. So I don't know if you heard that in London, there's a transportation I guess the word is strike that's happening this week and next week. And it's going to be very challenging for people. And that's because to have a transportation week this week and next week, and particularly busy times in London, is just going to make movement harder. Okay, I said something which I don't know to be true. You said yes, so it might be true. That's coincidence.
Because it's so often and so common, it's entirely likely. And yes, I just concur with you.
Yeah.
I feel like a fool. Point well made.
And you'll notice I said it twice.
Yes.
But when I said it in order to say something twice and
Yes.
to get you to concur, and it succeeded. And the reason that repetition works is that if something's easier to process in the mind, people tend to think it's true. There's a kind of easier, truthier heuristic in the head. And that's used intuitively by self-interested, let's say, companies and politicians. And by some, it's used non-intuitively. It's used because they well know the research. And that's a problem. So we need counter nudges with respect to that. And there are things that social media companies can do, like limit the distribution of things that are false, or not allow them to stay up on the site in any case if they're in a category of very damaging falsehood, and not rest content with the thought that, well, people can correct the falsehood and it'll be all right. That's not true.
The social media environment in which we live is one that distributes falsehood much more quickly than truth, and falsehood, believable falsehood, is far stickier than truth, because truth often is quite dull, and it doesn't play to our biases.
So the illusory truth effect is if you hear something twice or 3 times or 4 times, you're more likely to believe it's true. And the reason is that if you hear something the first time, processing is a little complicated in the brain. There's a surprise signal, which is associated with critical scrutiny. If you've heard it a couple of times, like let's say you've heard a shrimp's heart is in its head. That might even be true. I don't know, but I'm saying it not because I know it to be true, but because it's a little startling. And then if I said again, a shrimp's heart is in its head, the first time you heard it, probably thought, what? That sounds a little crazy. But if I said again, the shrimp's heart is in its head, even I think it is true, in fact, but bracket that. I've said it 3 times now, and having said it myself 3 times, it's really easy for me to process, and I tend to think it to be true. That's the very damaging phenomenon that social media often exploits.
And if I hear it from another source or another 2 sources, it's more likely to become a fact in my head. And then I can't apostatize. It's my new favorite word. You cannot change it. Once you've got an idea embedded in your brain, it's incredibly hard to change it, which is why religion is so strong, why people who are avid followers of political parties are so dogmatic in their views. And that's part of this problem, isn't it?
Well, people do change their minds. I'll tell you a story where the one time I've been confounded by social media in a way that's quite embarrassing. I read on social media that a very distinguished professor, I'm not going to mention him because I don't want people to believe in the thing, very distinguished economics professor who's also a dear friend, I read that he died. And he's old, so it wasn't completely preposterous. Then I checked it around a little bit on social media, and there were other reports that he died. And so I tweeted that he died, and this was a terrible tragedy, and how sad I was that this great figure had died. And then it was relatively promptly corrected that the people who had been saying this, it originated with one I think, malevolent liar. And then it spread to various innocent readers. And the fact that, as you say, the fact that it said been from various was, to me, who works on this stuff, credible. And that was not a good day. First, because I thought my friend died, and second, because I spread to others the falsehood. But when it was corrected, I didn't think, oh, he's dead. Those corrections are false. I thought, phew, he's with us. And so with respect to falsehoods, there might be some part of one's cranium that thinks the falsehood that one once believed might be true. But the good news is the human brain is capable of thinking, actually, the Earth does go around the sun.
When we make decisions, Steven Pinker's very strong on this. It's don't rely on media, don't rely on journalism, don't rely on social media, don't rely on networks, rely on data, rely on facts. And I suppose the only protection we've got against the dark arts of misinformation is facts.
Well, I think this is a fantastically large subject. So I have a new book out with a neuroscientist called Look Again, which is my current focus. It's on habituation. And my co-author, Tali Sharot, did a study in which people could click in her designed social media world, not a like button, but a trust button. I clicked trust. And that trust button did 1,001 good things. It got people more likely to believe what's true. It got people to circulate falsehoods less often. It got people to produce and display falsehoods less often because there was a trust button. So the idea of creating a world in which we don't like but trust, I think that's at least illustrative of a possible way forward.
A world in which we don't like, we trust. That does sound like it might be a way forward. Nudges are the answer to helping people go in a positive direction. They can also be used to take them somewhere that's not the best place for them to go. Cass Sunstein's Art of Deciding is about more than just getting people to choose healthcare options that are good for them. It's about trying to make sure that the world chooses a path for good. Let's hope he succeeds. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding. You'll find us on all major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. Like our most recent one with the Booker Prize judge, Sarah Collins. She was fantastic. She gave us an inside track to the process of deciding on the publisher for her eagerly awaited second novel. The results of that decision just revealed. Fourth Estate beat 7 other publishers to American Dream, her story of love and hip-hop. Sarah also shared with us how she came up with the idea in the first place. If you've ever wondered how these things happen, go back and check it out now. And you'll find all kinds of other interesting deciding stories there to enjoy as well. Please give us a rating, leave a review, and tell anyone who is looking for something else to listen to about the art of deciding. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Until the next time, bye-bye.